There's a kind of silence that only certain men recognize, and it usually shows up when the world finally stops demanding a performance. Not the quick calm between two meetings, not the quiet you get when your phone dies or the house empties for an hour. I'm talking about something deeper, a stillness that feels deliberate, almost engineered. A moment when the outside pressure loosens its grip, when the constant push to be on, to prove something, to react fast, to keep pace falls away. And in that space, a man can finally breathe like his lungs belong to him again. For some men, that breath doesn't feel like escape. It feels like alignment, like stepping back into the tempo that fits their wiring. Their thoughts stretch out, their shoulders drop, their eyes stop scanning for what's next. They're not shutting out life, they're entering it on their own terms. Because solitude, for the man who understands it, isn't emptiness, it's room. It's clean space in the mind. It's the freedom to exist without explaining your pace, your mood, your presence, or your silence. No social script to maintain, no need to entertain, reassure, or keep the vibe going. Just a private room inside yourself where you can think straight. That's the first thing most people miss. The world often treats solitude like a symptom, like a warning sign, like something to fix. A man declines an invitation and people assume rejection. He doesn't answer immediately and they assume distance. He's quiet in a room and they assume boredom or arrogance. If he chooses calm over constant connection, the labels arrive quickly: cold, detached, antisocial, guarded, broken. But most of the time, none of those are true. What looks like detachment is often discipline. What looks like disinterest is often energy management. What looks like isolation is often a man protecting the inner stability that makes real connection possible. The modern world measures connection by visibility, how often you show up, how loudly you participate, how much you share, how frequently you broadcast. But a solitary man measures connection differently. He measures it by depth, by truth, by how clean the bond feels. He's not trying to be seen everywhere. He's trying to be present somewhere that matters. And this is where the friction starts, not because the people around him are cruel, but because they are conditioned. Most people are taught that participation equals health, that constant social activity equals happiness, that being alone is automatically sad. So when a man lives by a different rhythm, people interpret it through a deficit lens. If he's not constantly visible, they assume something is missing in him. They rarely consider that he might be full, that he might be choosing solitude because it works. And yes, sometimes friends worry. Sometimes family presses. Sometimes colleagues misread it as low commitment or lack of enthusiasm. In workplaces and social circles, the man who isn't always in the mix can get quietly underestimated. People assume the loudest guy is the most confident, the most involved, the most capable. But noise is not proof of strength. Constant social motion is not proof of depth. And being alone is not proof of failure. For many men, solitude is not where life ends. It's where it starts making sense. Because choosing to be alone isn't always moving away from people. Often, it's moving towards something essential. It's moving toward clarity. It's moving toward focus. It's moving toward a sense of internal order that the outside world can't provide. A man who chooses solitude isn't necessarily hiding. He may be building. He may be repairing. He may be calibrating. He may be learning how to live without bleeding energy into every demand that shows up at his door. There's a difference between isolation and solitude. Isolation is when you feel cut off, unwanted, or trapped away from others. Solitude is when you are alone by choice, and the choice makes you stronger. Solitude is not the absence of life, it is the removal of static. When a man steps into chosen quiet, a few powerful things begin to happen. First, his attention stops fragmenting. Out in the world, attention gets hacked all day long by conversations, notifications, expectations, interruptions, social cues, the subtle pressure to respond correctly. Even when things are enjoyable, the mind is still managing, still tracking, still adjusting, still performing. In solitude, there is no audience. That changes everything. The mind, when it isn't defending itself socially, becomes more honest, more direct, less cluttered. Thoughts unfold fully instead of being cut off mid sentence by the next demand. A man can finally finish a thought. He can sit with an idea long enough to understand it. He can make a decision without 10 outside voices shaping it. Second, his nervous system calms down. A lot of men don't realize how much stimulation they're carrying. Not just big stress, small, constant pressure. The constant awareness of how you're being perceived. The subtle effort of being agreeable, funny, sharp, confident, composed. The strain of reading the room and staying appropriate, even if you're good at it, it costs something. This cost isn't weakness, it's physiology. Some men recharge through the interaction. They come alive in noise. They gain energy from people, conversation, movement, crowds. Other men burn fuel in those same environments. Even when the interaction is positive, their system spends energy processing stimuli, voices, expressions, timing, social nuance, quick transitions, unpredictability. They can enjoy the night and still feel drained afterward. They can like people and still need space from people. That's not emotional fragility, it's energy economics. And once you understand that, something changes. You stop treating your need for solitude like a personal flaw. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? You start asking, how do I structure my life to stay strong? Because when the nervous system is overloaded, the results are predictable. Fatigue, irritability, restlessness, brain fog, shallow sleep, diminished patience, reduced creativity, a low level tension that never fully lifts. A man begins to feel like he's walking around in armor, even when there's no war. Solitude removes the armor. It lets the mind settle, like sediment sinking in a glass of water. Third, solitude restores self control. A man who never gets time alone is constantly influenced by other people's energy, other people's expectations, other people's emotions, other people's noise. Over time, he can lose contact with his own baseline. He begins reacting instead of choosing. Solitude brings him back to center, and center is where a man becomes dangerous in the best way. Dangerous to distraction, to manipulation, to chaos. A centered man doesn't get pulled into every argument. He doesn't get baited easily. He doesn't need constant approval. He can move with intention. That's one of the most misunderstood parts of solitude. The man isn't withdrawing from life. He's training himself to handle life. Now let's talk about what many men carry but rarely admit. Social fatigue. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from being socially competent. It's not the exhaustion of being hated. It's the exhaustion of being liked. The exhaustion of showing up, smiling, contributing, being present, making conversation, tracking the mood, adjusting your tone, keeping your face calm, making sure you don't look weak, weird, or off. Doing all that while your mind is tired. A man can leave a gathering with people saying, "Great to see you," and still feel like his internal battery got drained to zero. And then he hears the same misunderstanding. You're so quiet lately. Or, you never come out anymore. Or, are you okay? And he starts wondering if he's broken. But he's not broken. He's just paying the invisible bill that comes with constant interaction. Some men are built to perform socially for long stretches without cost. Others can do it, but it's expensive. Their strength isn't in endless exposure. Their strength is in selective presence, in showing up fully when it counts instead of being half alive everywhere. This is where a man has to get honest. If your energy is limited, you must spend it like a professional. If you waste it, you will feel it. Solitude then becomes strategy, not avoidance, not weakness, strategy. Because in solitude, a man doesn't just rest. He integrates. He processes what happened. He reviews conversations. He recognizes patterns. He thinks about what he actually believes, what he actually wants, what he's actually willing to tolerate. He sees where he compromised unnecessarily. He notices where he was authentic. He learns. Solitude turns experience into wisdom, and wisdom is what separates men who repeat the same mistakes from men who evolve. This is also why solitude often produces clarity that crowded life can't deliver. In noise, you live in reaction. In quiet, you live in reflection. Reflection isn't passive, it's power. It's how a man understands his own triggers instead of being controlled by them. It's how he recognizes which relationships nourish him and which ones drain him. It's how he catches himself before he says something he can't take back. It's how he stops making decisions for applause and starts making decisions for integrity. And here's another misunderstanding. People assume that men who value solitude are emotionally numb, that they don't feel deeply, that they avoid intimacy, that they are detached from life. In reality, many solitary men feel more than they show. They just don't perform their feelings for the room. A man can have a vast emotional world and still be quiet. He can be deeply empathetic and still need space. He can care intensely and still prefer to process privately. Many men don't experience emotions as something they want to display in real time. They experience emotions like whether something to observe, understand, and move through carefully. Solitude gives them the space to do that without being judged or misunderstood. In quiet, a man can admit what he doesn't say out loud. He can face grief without being rushed. He can acknowledge fear without being shamed. He can examine anger without turning it into destruction. He can sit with uncertainty until it becomes direction. That's emotional strength. That's not emptiness. But because it happens privately, the world assumes it isn't happening at all. This is the hidden advantage. Solitude allows emotional processing without performance. It allows a man to become stable instead of reactive. Instability is rare. Stability is valuable. Stability is leadership. Now let's talk about relationships, because this matters. A solitary man often chooses depth over breadth. He isn't trying to maintain 10 shallow friendships just to say he has a social circle. He'd rather have 2 men he can trust than 20 men he can laugh with, but never rely on. He isn't collecting contacts, he's choosing bonds. And that doesn't make him cold. It often makes him loyal. Men who value solitude usually respect energy. They don't waste it. That means when they do give you their time, it's real. When they commit, it's deliberate. When they speak, it's considered. Their relationships may look quiet from the outside, but they can be strong enough to withstand time, distance, and silence because they aren't built on constant reassurance. They're built on respect. This is also why solitude protects men from the worst kind of social damage: shallow. Dynamics, performative friendships, constant comparison, unnecessary drama, attention games. A man who knows himself doesn't need a crowd to validate him. And because he doesn't need it, he's harder to manipulate. Solitude builds discernment. Discernment builds standards. Standards build a life that doesn't collapse under pressure. But here's where things get complicated. Many men learned early that their preference for quiet was wrong. As boys, they're often pushed toward a constant participation. Join the group, talk more, be outgoing, compete, perform. A boy who wants to read, think, build, tinker, observe, or spend time alone can get treated like a problem to solve, not necessarily with cruelty, often with good intentions. Parents want their sons to be confident. Teachers want them to socialize. Culture praises the loud, the bold, the visible. So the boy adapts. He learns to blend in. He learns to be normal. He learns to override his natural rhythm and meet expectations. And for a while, it works. He becomes functional in groups. He learns to be likable. He learns to play the game. But the cost is subtle. He starts to believe his true preference is something to hide. He becomes a man who can socialize but feels depleted afterward. A man who shows up but feels he's acting. A man who can succeed externally but feels internally out of sync. That's not failure. That's adaptation. But adulthood is where a man gets to choose whether he keeps living by an old script. This is where the question finally surfaces, sometimes quietly, sometimes with force. Am I built wrong? That question can haunt a man because the world celebrates the opposite of him. The world celebrates hustle, constant connection, constant output, constant presence. It celebrates the man who never stops moving, never stops talking, never stops networking. So if you're the man who finds peace alone, guilt can creep in. You start to feel like you're missing life, like you're wasting time, like you should be out there doing more, proving more, showing more. But guilt is often just a sign you're measuring yourself by a ruler that wasn't made for you. A man who needs solitude isn't failing at life. He's listening to the instructions built into a system. And modern psychology supports this more than culture does. Personality differences are real. Temperament differences are real. Stimulation thresholds differ. Processing styles differ. Some minds are built for depth, not volume. Some men work best with fewer inputs and more focus. Some men recharge in quiet because quiet is where their mind can operate cleanly. When a man lives in alignment with his temperament, he tends to become more stable, more consistent, more capable. When he fights his temperament to fit a social ideal, he becomes drained, resentful, distracted, and often numb. Solitude, then, isn't just preference. It can be a foundation for well-being. It can be the condition that allows a man to function at his best. And that brings us to a powerful reframe. Growth doesn't always look loud. A lot of men think growth has to look like constant exposure. More events, more networking, more activity, more social momentum. But for men wired for solitude, real growth is often quiet. It happens in discipline, in reflection, in skill development, in the private hours where nobody is watching. A man builds himself in silence. He learns, he trains, he thinks, he reads, he practices, he refines. He doesn't need applause to become better. He needs structure, consistency, and space. That's why solitude can be a path to mastery. Mastery is rarely created in crowds. It's created in repetition, in focus, in long stretches of uninterrupted effort. A man who embraces solitude often becomes dangerous in the most useful way. He becomes competent. He becomes self contained. He becomes skilled. He becomes a man who can sit alone and still feel purposeful. And that is a form of freedom many people never experience. Because if you cannot be alone without feeling empty, you will spend your life chasing distractions. You'll mistake noise for meaning. You'll confuse attention with value. You'll keep yourself busy to avoid facing yourself. But a man who can be alone and still feel full has something rare: internal stability. He has a home inside himself. He can walk away from what drains him. He can say no without collapsing. He can choose quality over quantity. He can build a life that fits him instead of bending himself to fit the world. Now, I'm not going to pretend there's no cost to being this way. Even when a man finds peace in solitude, there can be an ache underneath it. The experience of being misunderstood. Friends might interpret distance as rejection. Family might worry because they don't recognize contentment without crowds. The world often equates being alone with being lonely. And even if a man knows the truth, he can still feel unseen. Not because he wants attention, but because he wants accuracy. He wants to be understood without needing to defend himself. He wants his choices to be recognized as intentional, not pathological. That longing is human. It doesn't contradict strength. It proves there's still heart in him. A man can be independent and still want to be correctly known. A man can be self-contained and still want his people to stop assuming he's struggling. That's why this path takes courage, because choosing solitude is often choosing to disappoint expectations. It means declining invitations without offering a long explanation. It means not performing happiness in the way others demand. It means accepting that some people will project their fears onto your quiet, and it means continuing anyway. Because eventually, if a man stays honest, he arrives at a simple truth: living in alignment matters more than being. Approved. Peace is not a reward for compliance. Peace is the consequence of integrity. When a man chooses time alone, he is not making an excuse. He is making a statement: my energy is valuable. My mind is worth protecting. My life is mine to shape. He stops apologizing for his pace. He stops treating quiet like a defect. He stops proving himself to people who only respect what they can see. And that's where solitude becomes more than a preference. It becomes self-respect. A man who respects himself does not live to be constantly available. He does not trade his inner stability for social points. He does not confuse visibility with value. He learns to be present when he chooses and private when he needs. He learns that saying no is not selfish if it protects his ability to show up fully later. He learns that being alone is not the opposite of connection. It can be what makes a connection meaningful. Because the goal is not to avoid people. The goal is to avoid living in a way that slowly drains you until you become a shadow. Solitude is where a man refuels. It's where he remembers what he actually thinks. It's where he rebuilds his patience. It's where he hears his own voice again. It's where he regains the strength to engage with the world without being consumed by it. And if you are that man, the man who feels more himself in the quiet, then hear this clearly. You are not missing life. You are inhabiting it differently. You are not broken. You are designed for depth, and depth has a cost. It requires space. The world will always push noise. It will always sell constant connection as the cure for everything. It will always reward the visible. But the man who chooses alignment over expectation carries something the world can't fake: steadiness. And steadiness is power. The loud can impress. The steady can lead. The loud can attract. The steady can endure. The loud can win attention. The steady can build a life. So as the day winds down, as the noise fades, as the world stops asking you to perform, don't treat that stillness as a sign you're falling behind. Treat it as proof you're returning to yourself. In that quiet, strength reveals itself without needing to announce it. In that solitude, your mind becomes yours again. And when you step back into the world, you don't do it starving for approval. You do it with clarity, with control, with intention, not because you escaped life, because you finally chose to live it honestly.